Hello and welcome back. My name is Don Arleth and watching World Talks here on TVP World. No concrete decisions were made at the trilateral discussions between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States in Abu Dhabi this week. However, we do know that the Russians have proposed the U.S. a $16 trillion economic cooperation package, and President Zelensky has said that the U.S. is ratcheting up pressure to make an agreement by this summer. The next round of negotiations is set to take place in Miami next week. And now joining me to discuss this and more is Michael MacKay, former lecturer at the University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Hello, great to see you, and thanks for joining us tonight on World Talks.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yes, now territory is still a holdup. I know last time we spoke, I asked you exactly about this. I asked you if if there's any perceivable way that Kyiv could make a concession on this, but let's flip the tables. What about Russia? Why does Russia have to have the entire Donetsk region, including the territories that it doesn't occupy? Do you think they're absolutely dead set on this? They don't control Kherson, for instance, which is the capital of the Kherson region.
That's correct. So I think we should not look at it as why does Russia say they have to have all of it, because that's just what they're saying now. Don't forget that the war aim of Russia is to annihilate Ukraine, to remove its independence and to destroy Ukrainians as a distinct people. And for the moment, Donetsk region is the thing that they will say. But even if, for some crazy reason, the Ukrainians would agree to give this up, there would be another demand. For example, you mentioned Kherson. Right now, the Russians are just on the left bank, the southern bank of the Dnipro River, but they'll say, oh, well, we need all of Kherson region, which is the other side of the river, including the city of Kherson. And then they'll say, oh, well, what about Zaporizhia? We partially occupy that region, and we need all of that, including the regional administrative capital of the city of Zaporizhia. So there will always be another demand. So we shouldn't get tied up to Donetsk. I think it is an E-Day fix for the Russians because Putin has been basically promising the capture of all of Donetsk since the Russians invaded in April 2014, when they carried out the siege of Sloviansk. And of course, every deadline has been missed. Over the last couple of years, Ukraine has built extremely powerful defensive lines in Donetsk region, which are pretty much insurmountable to the Russians by military means, given their current force levels and capabilities on the battlefield. So I don't think we should get too tied up on this. It's just the latest objection that Russia is making to make sure that these peace talks never succeed.
Well, we've heard, this is also an interesting development, we've heard that the pressure is mounting to get a peace deal done, presumably sometime in March in best case scenario, but the deadline is for the early summer. What do you think the reasoning is behind this, and is it even realistic, given where we are and how far apart we are on this territorial issue?
It's not realistic. It's just a way for Russia to try to put Ukraine on the back foot, to be the country that says no, and therefore seems to be the impediment to peace, but also to get the Americans to go along with any demand Russia makes and never put pressure on the Russians. And so far, they've seen that that is true. So let's not forget that every time that it seems that there is progress, and the only indication we have is that the Americans say there is, but there's no objective reason to assume there's any progress. But let's say there is. The Russians come up with insurmountable objections to make it impossible for Ukraine to agree. For example, Zelensky said, I'd be very happy to meet with Putin in a bilateral or trilateral format. Well, this seems to put the Russians on the back foot. But then Peskov, the Putin spokesman, said, oh, we'll agree to that, but the meeting has to be in Moscow. And of course, everyone knows that this is a trap, probably to assassinate Zelensky. So the negotiations about the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, it seems that that's progressing with some American involvement. And then just in the last couple of days, Russia says, oh, no, no, we have to have 100% control of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and we will sell the electricity. So every time there's the indication of movement, or at least what the Americans say there is, the Russians create impossible conditions to try to make it seem as if Ukraine, because they cannot accept these things, is the obstacle to peace.
Right, right. Now, okay, what if Ukraine agrees to everything except giving up the territory that it controls in the Donbass? Do you think the U.S. is going to actually put pressure on Ukraine or force it to do so? Will the U.S. react? Will the U.S. see the tactics that Russia is using that you just described and realize they're essentially being played by the Russians?
No, they won't. The Americans will never do this because they are being played, but they're also willing to go along with it. And we see this with this fantastical $12 trillion Dmitriev package that was floated in the last day or so. Of course, this is fantastical. There's no $12 trillion anywhere in the bankrupt Russian economy, or the strained Ukrainian one, or in Europe for that matter. So it's just a fantasy, but it's an enticement to corrupt officials like Steve Witkoff and Trump himself, to string them along, yes, but also to make them willing collaborators in this deception. Don't forget that while this is going on, Russia is attacking Ukrainian civilians with missiles and drones at a rate we have not seen in this entire 12-year war. They're doing it at a time of extreme cold in most of Ukraine, and they're targeting energy infrastructure. They're still attacking along the invasion battlefront, 1,400 kilometers, and they're attacking in every place that they can. They're not having military success, but they're doing that. So the facts are Russia does not want peace and will never want peace. If in some fantastical universe Ukraine were to give up Donetsk region, the only thing this would do is move the battlefront 50, 100 kilometers a little bit further west, and the war would continue. And we know that because we saw that with the fake ceasefire deals of Minsk 1 in late 2014, Minsk 2 in early 2015. Russia will violate this ceasefire, and they count on the West abandoning any security guarantee to Ukraine.
Which brings me exactly to that point. So where are we at with the security guarantees? And if Ukraine doesn't agree to this contentious point of the Donbass, do you think the United States will actually force it to? And by doing that, saying, well, we'll walk away from this whole process. Is that in the cards?
It is, but I think I mentioned the last time we spoke that Ukraine is engaged in very delicate diplomacy to keep the Americans engaged in Europe in a way that the traditional European powers are not doing at all. And that is to, yes, the United States has cut off military aid to Ukraine. They just have this program where Europeans can buy weapons and then give them to Ukraine. So they're really trying to profit off of Russia's war in that case. They've stopped humanitarian assistance. So all of the aid in the recent bombing campaign that European countries have given, heating tents and generators and so on, none of that is coming from the United States, which has tremendous capacity, which is not choosing to do. So the idea that, oh, the United States will walk away from this, the thing is the United States has already given up most of its leverage. Ukraine's own weapons program is enormous now. Most of the drones it uses, defensively and offensively, are domestically produced. And we're starting to see, finally, some serious support from European countries. So yes, it is good that that Ukraine is doing such a delicate necessary job to keep the Americans engaged at all, even though the Americans have cut off the Europeans. But the really, we the Trump regime likes to talk about who has the cards. Trump really doesn't have the cards here. There is no $12 trillion in this deal. There is no way that the United States could force Ukraine from stop defending itself. How could they possibly do that? You can't go to every one of almost 40 million Ukrainians and say, you can't defend yourself. It's just not going to happen. So I see this entire so-called peace process as really just a very sad way to draw out the attacks on civilians that Russia is engaged in.
Right. Well, back to that $12 trillion economic package that's been floated out there. I'm concerned that, in fact, Donald Trump will say 12 trillion. That sounds really, really good. Is this a way for Russia? Is this their strategy to try and buy favorable terms in any agreement that's being worked out in these trilateral discussions?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. They know that this works completely with Trump. The fact that this $12 trillion doesn't exist is not a problem, really, for its effectiveness as a hybrid warfare weapon, which is really all it is. Because they know it is a way to enforce Trump's compliance. Russia is very good at this. They've been able to succeed for about 40 years with Trump, and this just happens to be the one this week.
Yeah. Well, okay, well, we're going to be paying close attention to the situation as it moves forward. Michael MacKay, former lecturer at University of Kyiv Mohyla Academy. Another fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thanks for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.